A US tech company was on a routine Zoom call when something strange happened. Mid-meeting, the entire dev team vanished. No warning, no explanation. Support tickets froze, Slack DMs went dark. It was like they'd been wiped off the map. Then the news broke. There was a massive power outage in North Korea. The dev team wasn't gone. They were all sitting shoulder to shoulder in a Pyongyang apartment pretending to be in 5 different countries. And that was just the beginning. Many of them were holding jobs at multiple companies at the same time, some making upwards of $300,000 a year. And I truly never thought I would say this, but North Korea did something right when it comes to overemployment. See, getting hired at a Fortune 500 company is hard. Less than 5% of people get jobs, which makes it as hard as getting into Stanford. But despite that, North Korea pulled it off over 300 times. They used fake resumes, stolen identities, deepfake interviews, and they even hired Americans to host laptop farms, where US-based operatives would receive the laptops and then give credentials to the North Koreans so that they could remote access in with a VPN. And they got away with this for 6 years and made over $88 million, almost all of it being funneled straight into North Korea's nuclear program. This wasn't just overemployment, this was espionage disguised as remote work. And I say that as someone who used to be overemployed, working for 3 Fortune 500 companies for 4 years. So I can tell you, as insane as it sounds, there are lessons in the madness. Here's how they pulled it off, what they got right, how they got caught, and then what you can legally steal and use from North Korea's playbook. Now, the first thing was they understood the application game. Instead of applying to 5 or 10 jobs like most people, they applied to hundreds or even thousands for each employee, using a massive volume approach. But only they used stolen US identities. And the way they got these credentials was by setting up fake job postings and then collecting people's driver license, passports, or other documents during the onboarding process. Another thing they got right was the interviews. They came prepared like you wouldn't believe. They knew more about the company than the people interviewing them. They had talking points about the business model, they knew the tech stack, and they even researched the interviewers' LinkedIn to find common ground that they could talk about. Only they arrived at the interviews using deepfakes, and they used AI-generated answers because they didn't have any of the skills that they were talking about. Okay, but they did play the long game perfectly. See, they knew, unlike Soham Parekh, that if you just delivered quality work consistently, you can stay employed and didn't need to churn through all of these jobs. But then they got promoted and would send the higher level of access to their Lazarus hacking team, who then would steal military technologies and cryptocurrencies. Okay, but they did use time zones like chess masters. They knew that if one job was on the East Coast and another one was on the West Coast, there was a much lower chance of having conflicting meetings. And this is what I did to get my first 2 jobs to work perfectly together. Only they ended up working 14 hours a day to hit their legal quotas of $10,000 a month, or their families would be sent to prison camps. Okay, but they spread their work across industries strategically. See, they knew that working for the same industry twice gave a much higher likelihood of getting caught. If one job was at a bank, they made sure that another one was in healthcare or real estate or a different sector entirely, because the chances of you getting caught working for 2 jobs that are within the same sector is exponentially higher. And that avoided those pesky non-complete causes that actually kept them legal. Well, despite for the espionage, stealing identities, and all the funding going to dictators' nuclear weapon program. But here's what impressed me the most. They understood the math. They knew that 2 to 3 jobs was the perfect sweet spot, because that second job doesn't just double your savings, it triples or quadruples it if your fixed expenses stay the same while your income goes up. For instance, if you have 2 jobs, you're making $100,000 at both, your first job will be taxed at about 30%, to keep the math simple. That means $70,000 after taxes. And then you probably spend on the low end about $3,000 a month, meaning that your take home after all expenses, food, rent, insurance, etc. is about $36,000. Now with your second job, you will withhold a little more in taxes, so you'll probably pay closer to about 35%, meaning that after taxes you have $65,000. But you no longer have any expenses to cover, so those go straight into your bottom line. So if you keep the living expenses the same, which is the key, you will now be saving from $36,000 to over $100,000, which, if you could do that for a few years, can buy you a house, give you an insane head start on compounding interest in the future, or the funds to start a business and get the hell out of a 9-to-5, or the funds to build a nuke. So while North Korea made their fair share of mistakes, they proved that overemployment could work at an insane scale. But now companies are cracking down, requiring that you prove your documentation and then not allowing for remote access software to be downloaded on computers. But lucky for you and me, we don't need to do any of that stuff. So working 2 to 3 jobs is still possible if you have the right playbook, which, lucky for you, I made a whole video which people seem to love. Check it out. Thanks for watching.